There's Tracy. Hi, friend.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I am excellent. How are you?
Good. How's Texas?
Texas is actually sort of pleasant today.
Oh,
That's
what's making it pleasant today?
It's not 1,000 degrees outside.
And very literally define 1,000 degrees for me.
Very literally, usually right about now would be about 90 or so degrees. And this morning when I went to walk, it was about 75.
Okay, so it's
so
lovely.
yes.
Words that I can stand. Lovely, pleasant, good, all those very undescriptive, easy words. But it
Yes.
sounds like the weather in Houston is pleasant.
The weather in Houston is pleasant. However, most days around this time of year, it is not.
Right.
So,
right. Well, enjoy it. Enjoy it. We'll do this and get you back outside in a safe way.
yes.
So thanks so much for taking the time to chat. Liz has been raving about you and your work, and I did a little bit of digging, and it's pretty incredible. Thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I did my own digging. We've been doing some mutual digging.
Yeah, that's right. But I thought what would be really helpful is to dive into this context of, there's Liz, this context on how to have courageous conversations, because as we're 50 days out of the election, and while the election is a very important milestone and one that keeps me up at night, it's not the work that we all have to do for the rest of our lives. And even if the election goes in a direction that might give us a little bit of a deep breath, we still have so much work ahead of us.
Right.
And I think one of those, personally, I believe, is just in this extraordinarily divided nature of a country that we find ourselves in. You're either on the right team or the wrong team, the winning team, the losing team, the Democratic team, the Republican team. And I'm so desperate to bring people back into the gray, and desperate to bring people back into the I don't know-ness and the grace of just being and trying to navigate together, and some minutes having it and then some minutes not, and being generous with yourself in that swing. And so I'd love to understand a little bit more about this 100 Voices project that you're working on.
Yeah, so the idea of 100 Voices is to get us out of our silos and to have authentic, grace-filled conversations with people who we might not ordinarily have these conversations with. And to share lived experiences. So one of the things that normally happens in a dialogue is that we talk back and forth, right? That's what's happening today. That's what we do. But in a voices conversation, we ask a question and we listen actively while the other person is answering, and nobody talks over them, and nobody tries to challenge their lived experience. So it is a way to examine who we are and how we got to be who we are, and to give somebody else the opportunity to hear a life that they might not have had the benefit of participating in.
I was an elementary school teacher. I taught first grade and fifth grade, and I miss it tremendously. Like, every single time people are like, what are you going to do next? In the back of my head, I'm like, all I want to do is go back and be a teacher. But I feel like I can't yet. So, but one of the things that was like a prerequisite on our list of things to teach was this idea of active listening. And I was always like, I don't understand that state standard. If they're sitting in front of me and looking at me, they're listening. And it isn't until I've, one, gotten 10 years into a marriage, and two, trying to figure out like how the emptiness I find that people feel, to me, is possibly indication that they don't feel heard and that they don't feel seen. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts, Tracy J, on how you would describe active listening, and then how we can coach ourselves to get closer to that skill.
So I see active listening as um, not waiting to respond,
Mm-hmm.
and not practicing your response in your
Let me go get
head.
my husband. Let me go get my husband. Because like in mid sentence when he's like, but I'm like, oh, you're not listening to a
Right,
thing I'm
right. You
saying.
you haven't heard me. You haven't heard me. Um, and it's a thing we do sort of subconsciously. It's how we're culturalized. We're
Right.
always ready to like get our point in there and to always like to be heard and to be right. But in the same moment while we're trying to be heard and being right, we're not giving that grace to the other person.
I'm taking notes. Keep going. Yep.
So that's my stance on it, on the role of active listening. Um, like it also helps us get out of our own way,
Mm,
right? Because while we're doing all these other things with our mind, rather than actually listening to the person who's talking to us, we are missing some really critical things probably. I have three daughters. They are adult people now, and you can imagine that in their growing up, that they all had something to say, very often at the same time.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so you sort of hone the skill of trying to hear all of the voices at the same time because you have to, because somebody will inevitably say, but you didn't listen to me, or you didn't hear what I said. And you're right, I didn't hear what you said because my brain was trying to process
Right.
15 things.
Right. Right. We got to find your shoes for school tomorrow. And and the microwave's done heating up your dinner. Yeah, I got it.
Yes, yes. Or a daughter will say, um, but I told you that. But when did you tell me that? Did you tell me that in the middle of somebody else telling me something? Because how was I supposed to actually know that you said that? I didn't hear it. Um, so it's a skill we have to practice.
So if I said to you, of course I listen to people, like how what are some key takeaways for how to actively listen? Is there the like rule of when Jen is done speaking or when someone's done speaking, you take a beat? Or do you sit in silence? Like how are you coaching people through refining the skill?
So the way it shows up in a 100 Voices conversation is that we share and then invite. So you're not allowed to like just jump in to the conversation. You're invited into the conversation. Um, and so until you'll know I'm done because I'll say, Jenna, I'd like for you to share next. So the
So
beat is
it's
built in.
so it's releasing the participants of having to perform anything after hearing the story,
Yeah.
which is interesting. You know, this whole concept of being culturized, like what exactly does our culture eyes us to do? Is it to demonstrate that we're all knowing, that we have the answers, that we're on the right team? Like how would you define what our culture eyes us to do? Which I love that. And I don't know how I'll ever use that again, but I love it.
we we are culturalized for a lot of things, Jenna. Um, we are built and wired to be right, to be first, um, to make our point above everybody else's point, um, to defer to dominant voices, um, to sometimes shrink ourselves when we aren't seen as the most important person in the room. Um, so, so many things built into the way our culture shapes us.
To the way our culture eyes us.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about the 100 Voices initiative and campaign. How many voices do you have? How many do you hope to have? Where do you hope to distribute it? How can I be helpful?
So the sort of odd and interesting backstory to 100 Voices is that um, it was designed as a one-time event. I live in Houston, Texas. I wanted to have an event where I brought 100 women together to have this face-to-face conversation with women who did not share their backgrounds and just see what happened. And I thought, at best case, if this is successful, we'll do it again next year. So it'll be an annual event. We do face-to-face in Houston. And after doing it, a friend in Seattle said, hey, could you come to Seattle and do that? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll come to Seattle and do that. But then COVID shut the world down, so I couldn't go to Seattle. And then we figured out how to do it virtually. So we planned for it to be virtual. But in our planning period of planning to do this virtual experience for Seattle, then we all had the shared experience of watching George Floyd murder. And this passion project for me became essential work. And so then there were an exponential number of invitations beyond Seattle, which I'm grateful for. And so far we have done, I want to say 7 of these conversations. They don't always have 100 people. 100 is a it's a
pretty
post.
number. It's a pretty number.
It's a pretty number, right? But we have had hundreds of voices in these conversations, and I'm hoping that there will be at some point thousands of voices in this conversation.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it. We'll conjure something up off of Instagram Live. But
yeah,
what are the most surprising takeaways? Well, it's always frustrating to me when people are like, oh, you wrote the book. What's the most surprising takeaway? I'm like, nothing. I was confirming a hypothesis that I kind of sort of already knew going into writing the book. There were some nuanced surprises, but could you answer that question? I mean, have there been any surprises out of this?
Well, the biggest surprise is that it's still going. I only planned for it to be a one-time thing. And so that's the biggest surprise, is that it's a thing that people really want, and that it's continued to have a life beyond what I dreamed. Beyond that, though, is watching people's epiphanies about their own background, because the questions are structured such that you have a chance to think about your own background. One of our ground rules is that we speak from first person, and that we're not generalizing this conversation. This is about me and me only in this space. And so having people wrestle with the questions about their own lives. For instance, maybe my favorite question, which is hard to say because you don't have a favorite child, so I don't necessarily have a favorite question.
I definitely depending on the hour, I absolutely have a favorite child. This morning it was not my son.
I understand that.
The one who was dressed with her shoes on won.
Yes.
Speaking of the binary.
Yeah, but so I think the question I have grown most accustomed to enjoying watching people answer is, what have you learned, directly or indirectly, from your family of origin about people who share your cultural identity?
Family of origin being ancestors.
Family of origin being the people who you grew up in the house with.
And then the question was, what have I learned from them?
Mm-hmm. Directly or indirectly, about people who share your cultural identity.
Whoa. I mean, it's kind of chapter 2, which is this idea that there's rules. There's blueprint. There's the house you're going to live in, the white picket fence, the true love, the Prince Charming, which always makes for, a really healthy marriage. Yeah. I mean, that's really fascinating. And what do people that don't grow up in middle class and above homes say?
So the answers to that question range. You can imagine as many people as we've had in these conversations that we've had that many answers.
The question.
So my answer to the question is that I learned that being a brown girl, both brown and a girl, that I needed to work twice as hard to be
Yeah.
taken half as seriously.
Yeah.
So that is a thing I remember learning. For some people, they don't remember learning anything at all, which is sort of a telltale sign of the way our country is structured. That I don't really have to pay attention to anybody outside myself because the rules are designed for me.
That's right. That's right. Well, and that there are no rules.
And that there are no rules.
Because I'm just living and breathing the existence within the architecture.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's the most challenging concept for some of my audience members to wrap their head around is like, I decide who I marry, what city I live in, what job I did, how many kids I have, and all those kinds of things. And yes, that might be true. And I wrestled so hard with how to get this concept of like, there is a blueprint, there is a like sausage making process that we've all been pushed through. And while it's not the same for everyone, there's some components that are familiar to it, like reading.
Yeah.
Right? Like literacy. We'll just start in kindergarten if you want. But like, we all are pushing against that blueprint of what normalcy is. And my gosh, my friends who have wanted to check the boxes in the blueprint, but haven't been able to, haven't found love, haven't been able to conceive, haven't, whatever it might be, like, they're so hard on themselves. And the ones who have not necessarily cruised through it, but the ones who followed the rules closest have no idea that that blueprint existed.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of boxes, which I say that pretty often. I make circles and not boxes. But one of the questions on the sort of registration for 100 Voices is, how do you identify culturally? And I don't provide boxes. So there's no white, black, Hispanic, Asian.
Right. There's not the 7 options.
Right. There's not the 7 options. There's only you and your thoughts about who you are in the world.
So what
today.
is it? Just like a blank line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I didn't realize that would be a difficult question for people to answer.
Yeah.
But if you have, as you say, followed the blueprint, then you're deciding how you identify. Somebody else has decided that for you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So what do most people put in? Do they put ethnicity, religion, socioeconomics?
It's been sort of fascinating. And I've made these
What's been the most surprising answer on that line?
Oh, stardust.
Okay, you know what? They win. I want that one. Where's that on the census form? Right? No, literally, that should be on the census form.
It should. I make these word clouds for each event of the answers that people give.
Okay.
And it's so interesting for me to unpack it and just like, some people just identify sort of normally, you know.
Do they say just, normal?
No. Well, maybe. There was one person who said, I'm a nice guy. Okay.
Someone's working real hard to feel that way about themselves.
Yeah, okay. That's your cultural identity today. That works for me. You're a nice guy. So yeah, the range of answers is pretty fascinating.
Okay. And then Liz saying someone said delicious in their group. That's also pretty good. And then so how long do people get to speak for?
So the answers are not timed, but the session is timed. So each group has a facilitator, and it is the facilitator's job to sort of rein a person back in if they've sucked up all the air in the space, and to gently nudge them towards inviting someone else to speak. But usually people do pretty well. You know, groups have different dynamics, and so there will inevitably be somebody in there who this is their first time getting a chance to tell their story, and they're like gangbusters.
Someone wants to listen.
Yeah, yes. I have these listening ears, and nobody's gonna time me on it. But also, people are pretty generous about yielding the floor
Yeah.
because they really want to hear the other people's stories too.
Yeah. Well, you can't hate someone whose story you know. And
It's
I
hard.
think and I think people are just trying to make more space for themselves, and they can do it through hearing other people. And the relief of hearing someone else's trials and tribulations, be it like tiny or groundbreaking, I think is always just so helpful for us to hear and see each other. Um, one of the things that happened to me right after the Women's March in 2017, I almost forgot that, not that year, is that coming out of that, I remember traveling around the country on some work that I was doing, and people are like, oh, you were involved in the Women's March in some capacity. And they would either jump right into telling the story about them going, or without me asking, would say, I couldn't go because I had my grandmother's birthday. And like this, everyone had to mark where they were that day, either on the
Mm-hmm.
streets or not. And then if not, why not? And I never invited, like, did you march? I would never put someone on that spot because that wouldn't be a nice thing to do. It'd be the same thing as being like, who'd you vote for? Which, let's be clear, like, I will ask people that straight away now. But there's this desperation to be marked as like, I was here, I wasn't here. This is what I did in my life. This isn't what I did. Like, these are the things that I'm proud of. These are the things that I'm not. And I spent a lot of time on this concept of legacy in the book because I think it's a really important motivating factor, and not in a way that, like, one, there's a component of legacy that's like guilt, right? Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
presidents and astronauts and like people who have like cured disease who are like, oh, I didn't do enough, and like, so like there's always going to be that not enoughness at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I have a personal fear that I'm going to get to the end and be like, I should have done more. I have two fears. One, that my daughter is going to put me on the witness stand and be like, where were you when? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's allowed to do that, right? Like, because I kind of sometimes look back at my family, I'm like, what were you doing about
Mm-hmm.
indigenous reservations and not having access to water? And like, I'm just so scared she's going to be like, what were you doing about the geriatric population in this country, because they've been totally ignored? And like, I haven't done anything, and I'm like
Right.
scared she's going to hold my feet to the fire in 50 years. So I found that coming out of that, people were like, I was there, or I wasn't, but I wanted to be. And so I got obsessed with this idea of like, okay, well, mark it, record that somewhere, because your great great grandchildren are going to want to know that you marched, or your great great
Mm-hmm.
grandchildren are going to want to know how you felt about this time. And I
Yeah.
was so like, put it in a Google Excel spread, put it in a Google document, and like send it to a couple people and be like, this is why I showed up to march. This is why I didn't. And also, when people did say that they marched, I would say things like, but well, why? And it was always I've yet to hear somebody, over the thousands of people who have told me why they did march, like, no one's articulated that with any level of clarity that was like, oh, that's reproductive rights, the climate, yeah. And I'm like, no, everyone just showed up because there was an internal drumbeat that said, see and be seen, go now, like, our
Mm-hmm.
species is at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no one's articulated why they marched in ways that I was like, that's profound and unique and different. No one's done it. But I do think there's something to be said for people wanting to make their mark and being heard and being seen and it being recorded. And I know I'm speaking for a while now, but there is one quick last story that I want to share. And I forget, I heard it, someone told me about it, or I watched it on somewhere, but there was this homeless man in an extraordinarily poor community in Mexico. And it was like a friend of mine or a journalist or something who went and met this man. He was sitting by a dumpster, and the man said to him, can you just send a message to the world? Can you just make sure the world knows that I was here? And so the journalist or my friend, I can't remember, was like, okay, what else do you want me to tell them? And he like told them like 3 or 4 points about his life. And this man, when I say probably didn't have 2 pennies, very literally probably didn't have 2 pennies. And he just wanted to make sure the world knew he was there. And the gift you're giving people to so that they can share their existence is very generous. And it's sad that we have to make space for it, but let's elbow our way to do that.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to be able to do that. Um, you know, I think it's in the Bible. I don't go around quoting the Bible these days, but it could be in the Bible that your gifts make room for you. And and I think that is what is happening right now. I feel like this is the moment in my life that I was born for. Um, and that all the years that people thought I was weird are finally showing themselves to be beneficial. Um, you know, my company is the quiet rebel, and so like I have quietly rebelled my way to this moment, and I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to make space for people to share their stories. Um, there was a girl who I went to college with, and she has since passed. But I credit her for teaching me the benefit of knowing other people's stories. Um, she was not a person who was well liked, primarily because she was very clingy and she seemed really needy. And and it was difficult sometimes to be in the space with her because of those attributes. Um, but I had an opportunity to meet her family and realized that her family was not made up of nice people, and that she was really, really wounded, and that she was clinging on to anybody who would listen to her because she never had that growing up. And after I got to know her family and I got to understand how she got to be this person, I never, ever, ever wanted her to feel that again. And if I could control it, if I could be a place where she could latch on, then I was willing to do that for her. And so like she gave me that gift, and I honor it and appreciate it. And I just am hopeful that giving other people a space to share their stories and be heard um, will shift one how they feel about themselves, but also shift the way they show up in the world, and also encourage them to do it somewhere else, to just be a space where somebody can be heard.
That's right. That's a pass forward currency. When you receive the gift of somebody else's attention or love, or when somebody sees the the broken part of your lines, which they're never meant to be straight, um, and can put pieces together, like that's been a part of my maturity over the past 4 or 5 years, is to not look at that individual person and say they own that baggage, they are mean because of blank. I'm always like, oh, I need that person to scooch over for a second and I need to see who else is in their world, because
Yep.
it's never, if there's this desperation to be right, it's because they feel stupid. If it's this desperation to win, it's because they think someone else is watching and keeping score for them. If it's this desperate, it's like there's always something, like it's always what's behind the Oz
Mm-hmm.
curtain, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the reason why. And it's afforded, and actually, this is so messed up. Okay, but I'm saying it publicly anyway. The
Okay.
person who I realized this with was Saddam Hussein. I
Mm.
know. So during the Gulf War, I was a kid. This was the second Gulf War though, when I had this epiphany. And somebody was talking about how tortured he was by his father, and what his father used to do to him, and how his father would go put him in the square and embarrass him and make him feel all of these kinds of things. And I remember having this minute of like, oh, that's why he's doing this. And I remember being like, oh, and no pardoning, I'm not pardoning anything here, but it just became clarity for why he did that. And, you know, my book is a controversial book. It's a book written about white women's behavior. I did not predict the timing that it would be birthed into the world, but I'm also not surprised.
Yeah.
And the idea that, like, if we want to understand how we can build more of a community, I'm not interested in terms like ally, advocate, activist, like language is futile right now. But if we want to understand why folks are and aren't showing up for each other, we have to look behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And I just know, like, I can point all of us in a direction behind the curtain. Like, I'm gonna be like, oh, go look at that Barbie house. Oh, go look at that blueprint. Oh, that's sporty and cute and crafty in grade school. That might also be why, right? That prom king, prom queen thing, that might also be why. That wedding thing that we've been talking about since I was 6, that might also be why.
Yes. Yes, the why and the how we got to be who we are. I am currently listening to Cast to on audio, and the how and the why is showing itself in a really painful way. Yeah, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, and it's not because these are not things that I sort of knew or hadn't had an opportunity to study to some degree, but it's just in such plain language, which is the thing that I have. I listened to your interview with Monica Rogers, and I realized that I think that your book it does the same thing. Like, it just makes it plain. It's just clear language about who we are and how we came to be this way.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't want to know those things.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Tracy, I saw something like last week. I don't remember where I saw it. This is where I get, you know, as an author, I get real, my sources get real fuzzy. But it was something like, oh, if you don't know what Black Lives Matter now, if you don't know what Black Lives Matters means now, it's because you don't want to know. And that's true. And I can also tell you why they don't want to know. They're scared of that truth.
Yeah.
And they're scared to own the guilt affiliated and the shame affiliated with some of those truths. And there's, you know, scarcity and all that kind of, I mean, like,
yeah,
whatever. There's 10,000 books about it at this point. But like this idea that, like, I use the quote to open my book. It's impossible to wake a sleeping person who's pretending to sleep. And it's a Dene Navajo quote. And it's true, because when you intentionally close your eyes and choose not to look, like, you can't wake that person up. That's why last night I was reading, and also I hate when people are like, I have inside information about the election, because I'm always like, I don't think I believe it, but this one did come from a little bit of an inside source. And they said that Republicans aren't responding to polls right now, which should make everyone a bit nervous, which it does, right? Because the idea that, like, Biden's leading Trump, and, like, mind you, no one's allowed to believe another poll, like, again, in our life, like, our polling, data hygiene, like, I hope that wound from 2016 is not healed yet. Like, I hope it's festering for you and is infected and you never listen to it again.
Yes.
But they were like, oh, well, none of the Republicans are reporting, like, where they're going to go. And I remember thinking to myself, wait, what's my point here? What were we talking about? They don't need to. It was something, it's this concept of, like, they don't need to now. They're not interested in playing those games. They're in total, wait, what was the point I was trying to make? What were we talking about before?
People not being, you can't wake up a person who is pretending to sleep.
They're not interested in participating in the current conversation about an electorate democracy. Like, they're just going to sit asleep. I've been doing some Fox spots, which has been its own cultural awakening for me. And every time, like, you have to get on 10 minutes before you're supposed to go on air, and they're always late, which I understand. So it means I'm sitting there listening to Fox for like 10 minutes, sometimes up to like 30 minutes. Yeah. And I'm like, yo, I want to pick up these cards. If I watch this network, I could go back to my Netflix series and I wouldn't have to worry. Like, it is such an offering to go to sleep, which we all kind of want to do because we're all spending so much time beating up ourselves. But I think for me, my hypothesis is the gift of being in this with us just deepens purpose and widens life and enriches everything that you can get out of each other. But this idea of like being asleep, it's very toxic and very, I don't know.
So this is a question that I've not asked publicly, but I'm curious. Just generally speaking, if white people decide to just stay asleep, where do they think Black people are going to go?
As in, like, where physically, or how much worse do they think it's going to get?
Either or. Like, physically, do they think that Black people will just disappear? Poof, I don't have to see it. They're not there. They're gone. So then what do you do with all of us who are here? Because we're here.
Well, I think it's a great question. And this is like, hello world. These are the courageous conversations that, like, let's get into the weeds on this. So I don't think, as my drawer is open, I don't think there's a desire for, so to answer that in the most crass way possible.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's an issue with where Black folk are today. So as long as they just don't go anywhere else, they'll be fine. I don't think it's like the Arab-Israeli crisis where it's like, well, where are the Palestinians and where are the Israelis going to go? Because there's a limited amount of square footage. It's not that in this situation. It's not that here. It's you can stay where you are.
Yeah. Except the problem is that, or not the problem, a problem, one of the problems facing us in that scenario is that if we say that Black people are 5/5 of a person as opposed to 3/5 of a person, how we were once categorized, then we're afforded all the rights that come along with being 5/5 of a person. Then we're going to go everywhere that other people go.
That's the problem. Right? When you show up in the cul-de-sacs, when you show up in the schools, when you show up in the ERs and get seen first. So I mean, in those scenarios, and I see, I don't know the name of this person, but I see their note about the submitting. Again, I don't think it's submission as much as it's not getting in the way. So, like, I don't care if you have the mansion on the hill, as long as I do too. I care when you got the mansion and I didn't. And that's sourced from the scarcity mentality of like, oh, there's only 5 mansions on the hill. So who get those mansions? And my position, and I sort of wrestle with this a little bit with Denise Hamilton, who's, I know, a fellow Houstonian. Is that what you guys all call yourself?
Yes, we are Houstonians, yes.
That's the first time I've ever said that word in my whole entire life. So the idea of is like, is it a limited amount of resources to be given up? And my hypothesis is, I don't actually think we all want the mansion and that we all want the red sports car and that we all want the square footage. And she disagrees with me, although I'm obviously speaking for her here, and so this could not be totally accurate. But she's like, no, but where I am in Texas, everyone wants the car and the house and the square footage. And where I am in the Northeast, not everyone wants that. But I recognize I am also at a certain socioeconomic status where like I'm not looking to prove much more to the bleachers of people that I at one point had set up in my head. Right. So like I recognize that I'm able to release myself of a little bit of that performance because I've checked some of those boxes that you're talking about that you have no place for or space for. So I don't think it's the submission. I think it's just the not getting in the wayness, and then the don't take away from me. You know, one of my favorite examples is this idea of I was in a listening circle with some folks, and I don't remember how we got to this exact conversation, but it was about the fact that there are a lot of immigrants in her community. And she noticed the day that she went to go sign her kid up for soccer, she is like 7, 8 year old, for soccer, that as she passed the soccer fields, there were a lot of Hispanic Latino kids playing soccer. And that following season, none of them were on the soccer team. And she started to do a little bit of digging and realized that the fees to play, I don't know if they were $75 or $275, whatever it was, but she was like, I think they're too high. And then I said to her, okay, well, would you, if you could afford the other $75, like, would you pay for the spot? Right? Like, I kind of was trying to wedge it into reparations a little bit. And I was so grateful for her honesty. She's like, no, because then my kid wouldn't get the playing time. And they're right. And she's right. Like, you know,
because the kid who's better is going to be able to play.
My kid with the last name Goldberg is not going to be like, you know, I don't know, a point guard in the same way that like her kid wouldn't get this. So this idea of opportunity hoarding and scarcity hoarding is where I think that line gets really, really thin and complicated. To answer your very specific question about like, well, where do white folk want Black people to go? And I think it's like, if I have plenty to give, I don't care. But as long as if you start taking away from my kids and their opportunity for thriving and growth, that's when I think that's when it gets complicated.
Yeah. So then that brings us to where we are, right? So we have this fear-based society that we live in, right? And that we tell people that if you choose my way of thinking, life will be better for you. And if you don't choose my way of thinking, then these people over here are going to hurt you, whatever that looks like. And it looks like that on both sides of our coin, particularly politically. And I said this earlier this week. What day is today? Today is Tuesday, so it was Sunday. I had a chance to curate a conversation around voting and the importance of voting. And so for the first time in my almost 30 years of being able to vote, this is the first time I feel like there's an actual line in the sand politically. Like I used to be able to show up in spaces where people had differing opinions politically, and it didn't bother me. I didn't feel offended. You believe what you believe. You vote how you vote.
I'm totally tracking.
You know, and I'm just like, and I don't do boxes, right? So I have never been a Democrat in the way that people are like hard and fast Democrats. Like I vote my heart. I vote policy. Sometimes I vote for people I like, even if I don't necessarily like their policy. That's the truth. But I hadn't ever really been just like hard and fast, I'm a Democrat and I can't stand Republicans. Ever.
Yes. You sure? I can go and get them. You sure? Yes, my dad's going to get the kids.
Yay. Yay for dads.
Right.
I talked to my dad right before I talked to you. Dads are great.
Okay, go ahead.
So I never felt like I needed to like dig my feet in the sand and say, listen, this is where we are, right? But this year I strongly feel like there's a line in the sand. And although I'm still not a hard and fast Democrat,
right.
Like that's not where I am. But what I am saying is that the person who is currently occupying the White House, I cannot give him my vote in this election. And people who choose to vote for him, I don't know how I can be in community with them.
It's hard.
Because it says to me that they feel a particular way about me personally. And I know that that's like, all the things we read, the 4 agreements, take nothing personally, yada yada. I'm taking it personally. It feels personal. And I
You
have,
didn't feel that way in 2016?
I felt it, but not as much. It didn't feel as strongly. In 2016, I felt like people were actively choosing to vote based on fear. So there were people who were saying, I'm going to vote for the person who won the election because I'm afraid of what it might look like to have a woman in the White House. Right. And then there were people who were like, I'm going to vote for the candidate who didn't win because I'm afraid of this person who has no political experience. And everybody's decisions were like fear, 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 fear. So there was sort of a line in the sand, but also I could hear people with their wheels turning, and it didn't necessarily feel like hate to me. Yeah. It was still about economics or about some sort of I don't know.
I'm always like Benghazi, right?
Yes,
that's
yes.
the issue.
Yes.
So I come from a family where a big family, and I would say sadly, like we used to be very close, and we're not as close as we once were because I have a really hard time reconciling it too. This isn't, I always say, like, you can pray to whatever God you want. You can do whatever you want with your money. But when you start making decisions on behalf of my daughter's body, like, I'm going to weigh in.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to have to hear me. We're going to have to talk about politics at the table. And recently, one of my family members, who I love, I feel like, I don't know why I felt like I had to say that, but I did for a performative reason, said, but you have to put family first. They said, you're not allowed to do what you did in 2016 and flip the fuck out and cause all the tension in the family that you did. And when they say tension, they mean this thing.
Yeah.
Right? They mean that 315-page book about our white family. And I don't have another 315-page book in me yet. So don't worry.
Today. You don't.
Right,
today.
Right, exactly. But I kept thinking, I'm like, the most important thing for our family is this, like, the longevity and securing the existence of a species of which we all belong. And so you don't go tell an active military member, a nurse, an elementary school teacher, a firefighter, put your family first. You don't tell that to someone when they're speeding faster than 60 miles an hour on a highway, put your family first. Like, this idea of, like, putting your family first is a way of just, like, let's keep things pleasant, which I know I opened this conversation with, I hate that word. But this idea of, like, this vote, there was one sign from the 2017 March that I'll never forget. And it's the most important sign that I've ever seen. And it was after the march itself. And I couldn't get to the person to say, like, yes, you nailed it. But the sign said your vote was a hate crime. And that's how I felt. And that's why I lost my marbles coming out of the election, or I was just totally sane and everybody else wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that is surely how I feel going into November 3rd. And so when I hear people say things like, I got to see how the debates are. Oh, this is not an election about policy, folks. This isn't about policy. Don't wait to see what his climate policy is. Don't wait to see how 2 old white men are going to bully each other in a ring. You don't need to watch the debates.
At all.
Don't bother watching the debates. And I mean that, like, as someone who is so pro-democracy. The debates will tell you nothing.
Nothing that you don't already know.
Nothing that you don't already know. What, you want to wait and see what the tax policy is? Just Google it. Biden
Yeah.
doesn't want to raise taxes on people who make less than $400,000 a year. Next.
Yeah. You know, the one thing that I took away, not the one thing, but one of the things that I strongly took away from the 2016 election was that the cultural environment of America is more sexist than it is racist. And so so although we had a woman who was technically and really more qualified than the person who won, and who actually won the popular vote, she could not take that office because men still feel like they're supposed to be the dominant voice in this culture.
Well, and women feel that way. White women felt that way too.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a whole hypothesis around why I don't think white women showed up for her.
Yeah.
But
it's the sausage that you talked about. It's the we're all part of that same sausage factory.
So my theory, and I have to like really carefully thread this needle here because it's a tinge complicated even for me to wrap my head around. But the theory for me is, to your point, that there was a blueprint that we were all asked to follow. And not only did we have to check the boxes, but our academic institutions told us that we would get scores on those boxes. So you were either going to get an A or a B minus or a C plus, which would also dictate your merit. Or another way of saying it is would also tell you your self-worth and the value of you. And so some of us might have like run 5 marathons, but like never found a partner. Or some of us might have the career, but aren't beautiful according to what Barbie looks like. So there's ways to like check the boxes and get the A's. One of the boxes that we're asked to check is find yourself a partner. Now, if you can find yourself a partner that represents all the aces, power, money, influence on repeat, then you get an A plus. And she found that one. In addition to the career, was able to procreate, had some sort of job and career that was making her feel fulfilled, had influence, had power, had enough style, was lovely enough to look at. So she got A's on all of the boxes too. And by her getting all the A's, reminded us that we didn't. And so it was a fuck you to her because we felt so bad about ourselves.
That's terrible and unfortunate.
And I believe in a Republican vote this election is a fuck you to me. I genuinely think people in my family will pull the lever for Trump, and as they're doing it, they're going to say, fuck you, Jenna. Because one, and like this is my mea culpa, none of them are listening. None of those people who like are in my family are listening to this right now. Mm-hmm. But like, I'm sorry because I am the left and I have done a very effective and traumatizing job of making people who don't know feel stupid. The past 4 years, I have done a really good job of making people feel dumb. And since we all feel dumb, because we all feel dumb in general, I just like layered it on. Again, it's not a pardon, but it's the truth. Mm-hmm. Liberals are like, you fucking idiot all the time. And human beings are like embarrassed and they're humiliated by that.
Yeah. Well, you have that to contend with. And on the other side of this coin, I have conversations with people who say, I'm not voting because nobody gives a fuck about me anyway. So why should I show up to participate in this political menagerie, this circus, where it's not about me at all? And just let them duke it out. However it turns out is how it turns out, right? So then I have this sort of uphill battle to climb too, with saying, look, like this is the process. This is the structure. And regardless of how you feel about the structure, it's the one we have. we can't even begin to try to adjust the structure if we don't participate in the structure that we have. Not to mention all the people who have died, all the people who have fought, all the people who still are dying, all the people who are still fighting for your right to show up and voice your opinion. Um, so although I don't choose a party, I am very politically conscious, and I know that it is at least one of the things that in this democracy we say we have should be helpful, but we have to show up. So there's a fight
Oh
on
my
both
gosh,
sides.
Tracy J, we have just depressed every single person who's watching us. Anyway, back to 100 Voices. Okay, but we have an idea for how to get ourselves out of this mess.
Yes.
Which is how we're going to listen to each other differently. Active listening, 100 voices.
Yes.
We're going to start a conversation. Tracy and I, we're going to do something. We're going to do something together, and we're going to bring people like Albert in for some of these 100 voices stuff, because the whole idea is that we have to demonstrate our vulnerability. We have to make people feel heard. We have to give people space to make the mark, because that's what it means to be human. Like, why show up if you're not going to do something? And I want people to see it too. So I get it.
Yeah. Thank you. It's such a big thing to tackle, right? The expression, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And this is a big ass elephant. Like, it's been taking up the whole room. So now we got to kill it and we got to eat it. So important.
Wow, Tracy's like really getting down to business. I was going to say let's just let it out the back door, but it's fine.
No. If you let it out the back door, it might come back.
It will come back. It will come back.
This particular elephant has been let out of several doors, and it just keeps coming back.
I think that's fair. Tracy J, thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely.
I'm about to do some slacking and some emailing, so you'll be hearing from Tracy J and I again. And the next time we will be hearing from all of you. So Tracy J, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Go enjoy that lovely Houston weather, and we'll be in touch soon.
Good to talk to you.
See ya.
Bye.